And speaking of having our work cut out for us, a while back we spoke with longtime activist and friend of the show, Daniel Lee, about this work, the need for allies across all issues and the importance of honest, no bullshit realism for the fights that we now face. Take a look.
Us in the organizing and activism community, we've been talking about creeping fascism for, a decade or so, and trying to show people, it's not just corporations, it's not just government, it's corporations and governments working together. And we basically just elected a brand, not a person, basically, in Trump. So we just basically elected a corporation. And to some degree, it's good to see other people realize the country that they live in. I gotta admit, some of us are privileged to be able to travel and see the rest of the country on a regular basis and know exactly what we're dealing with. And some of us are but I mean, on the other hand, some of us just have our eyes open, because if you walk around like Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, you see extreme wealth inequality and you see extreme racism. If you are aware, you don't have to go to Alabama. You don't have to go to Ohio. If you are aware, it's there. So to some degree, it's great that these people have woken up. But the thing that I think, people are missing, and it's sort of like, I would say a white liberal thing, but also a black liberal, Latino, Asian liberal thing, is they can see all of the fucked up stuff that's happening everywhere else. Like now, I feel like they've woken up to one level, but they still haven't woken up to the stuff in their backyard or the stuff on their street. And I think that's a problem, because I think most people who have been organizing at all know that the biggest way and the most change that you can affect is in your neighborhood. But a lot of these people who have woken up on a national level still haven't woken up to the stuff that's in their neighborhood. And it'll be great to see them in the process. I mean, I went to the fairly large anti-Trump rally downtown, and I thought it was good to see so many people who were new. But I think those of us who've been doing this for a while need to be patient to some degree, but then we also need to tell them the deeper truths faster, because a lot of people are just focused on Trump. They are not focused on some of the places where, for instance, Trump and Clinton and the Democratic machine agree, which is, in most places, aside from blatant racism and blatant sexism. And I think it's good that people are woken up to the blatant racism and sexism. But now let's talk about like neoliberal economic policies and corporatism and, amending the Constitution and a whole lot of other stuff.
Yeah, there seems to be this sort of this reaction from people that, like longtime activists that I've seen, is where would these people still be protesting if Clinton had been elected? And the answer is probably no, but that doesn't mean that we should look down on them for showing up. But like you said, it does mean that we need to, by engaging with them, we need to make sure that this isn't just like a quick reactionary, like, oh, I checked off my activism box, I showed up in an anti-Trump rally, therefore I've done all that I need to do.
Exactly. And I think people, we always have these camps in the left of like, I don't vote at all, or I don't vote at all because I know my vote doesn't matter that much, or I only vote in local elections, or I vote and do stuff. And these people are still sort of in the center thinking that like, okay, I voted and I went to a protest. Like, I'm badass. Like, we gotta, expand their horizons of like, what it is civic engagement or organizing or activism actually is.
So what do you think that looks like in terms, like how do you get like this energy that's been that we've seen across the country? Like how, as seasoned activists, like how do we latch on to that and be like, great, so glad that you're here. Now this is what you need to know.
Well, I've actually been thinking about writing up something for the Los Angeles area, because I've actually met with a couple friends who are like, Daniel, what do I do? Or people who are just like, can you make some suggestions for me, like in the Bay Area? Can you make some suggestions for me in New York? And for white people, for the most part, I've been directing them towards Surge, showing up for racial justice, just because usually the way I've observed Surge and the way they interact in a number of different places is like they they don't necessarily have a big, huge national campaign, but the local surge groups work in solidarity with other groups. One of our Move to Amend affiliates in Ojai has been working with a surge group that's working around a farm workers' bill of rights. And that's very specific, like to Ojai, Ventura, and that like sort of valley breadbasket of food area. But I think that's a good entryway point for people to start to learn about all of the other stuff. But I think we do. I mean, I've been doing it one on one, like every day. Like in addition to going to the meetings with people who just want to have a collective response. Friends who recognize that I've been fairly active the last few years are just asking what's the best way for me to give my energy towards something that's going to make the next 4 years. Or, I mean, for me, I'm telling them, I'm like, well, you get into this is the rest of your life. So it's not just 4 years. But like, I've been taking people on a one-to-one basis and trying to really tease out not what they're good at, but what they're like actually passionate about, and trying to either hook them up with a friend who knows more than I do, or hook them up with a group that I'm probably going to at some meeting like the next day, or invite them to something. I think it's sort of up to us as seasoned organizers and activists to really try to show people where to go and what to do, and to not be condescending. And I know for some people that's a stretch because they're condescending to seasoned activists as well. But we need to recognize that people aren't where we are, but they need to get farther than, hey, I voted and I went to a protest. Like that's not good enough.
Right. So I do want to ask you specifically because this question has seemed to come up a lot in the past week. The role of white allies, particularly now, has it changed from before last Tuesday? Is it the same?
I think the role of a white ally hasn't changed, but I think there's more of a culpability amongst a certain subset of white people who are like, oh yeah, I can do something about this, or I do have privilege, and I can actually say stuff. I cannot be silent. One, like I mean, that's the biggest thing. The thing that was most frustrating with me around the last few years of police killings wasn't the people who were like, oh well, we don't have all the evidence yet. Maybe he did something. Oh well, he has a track record of being a thug or blah blah blah. Like that, you expect that shit. What was most galling was the people who were passionately, for instance, defending Hillary Clinton every time someone criticizes her, saying, "Oh, you're just a sexist," and it's like, no, wait, did you see my criticism? Who say nothing at all, like nothing at all, even in a week where, like, I think the shooting in Louisiana, like I think Philando Castile and a couple other things happened like within like a day or two of each other, and there was video of just like cold-blooded murder. And there was silence. Like there was just silence from certain white people who were incredibly passionate about a myriad of other issues. And I think it's that silence that we can't really be comfortable with anymore. Like uh, you don't have to lead the march. You don't have to like make the speech. You don't have to make the viral post or whatever. But you should say something because all of this is about all of us. And there was a great tweet I saw today. I didn't share, but there's that poem from World War II where it's just like, first they came from blah blah blah. But like, there's a great tweet that it was like, first they came from the Muslims, and I was like, nah, not this time. Fuck this shit. And it was just like, that's what white people need to do. Like, that's what white people need to be, because there's a white nationalist who is the chief strategist for the president. Like, he's a straight up white nationalist, misogynist, anti-Semite asshole, and he is not alone. Like, it's not like it's just him. There's a whole lot of stuff that Paul Ryan was saying about Trump during the campaign, and how he can't support him, and how having a registry for Muslims is just straight up racist. But then they won, and now he's silent because power is power.
So I like with that in mind as well. I want to ask your opinion because I know that you obviously you work with the issue of money in politics, but I know that you've been active in a lot of campaigns from environmental justice to Black Lives Matter. Talk about the importance like particularly right now about allies across issues. Like, if your issue is just environmentalism, why is it important to then be present and showing up for the Black Lives Matter issue or the immigration? Like, talk about this crossing over in issues.
Well, I think we've known for a very long time. I mean, one of the reasons I got involved in sort of organizing for constitutional reform is, just the recognition that if we want to move forward with any of the issues that are really galling, like environmental issues, sustainability, environmental justice, uh, even racism, it's like the people who are in power, the people who own the big corporations. Um, we're not going to move forward on any of these issues unless we take away their corporate rights. And now more than ever, Trump is like the epitome of like, coalescing a common enemy. Uh, because one, like he and most of the people on his team don't believe in climate change. They also believe in stop and frisk. He said he's going to deport 2 to 3 million undocumented people, like after he was elected. That was a campaign promise, but he said that like 2 days ago. And he made the caveat that 2 to 3 million criminals, when like all the statistics show you that undocumented people actually commit far less crime because they're far more scared of actually being deported. So finding 2 to 3 million criminals that you don't like label as criminals just because of their skin color is probably going to be a hard thing. But like Trump is the epitome of, I hate to say it, but like, just this touchstone that like physically embodies the need to work across issues. But I mean, we need to work across issues anyway, because I mean, immigration in general, the federal government said that they're going to stop using private prisons, but then that was for domestic criminals. But then ICE basically picked up the contracts, or ICE Homeland Security, some like conglomeration of that, picked up the contracts. And at first, like Geo Group and like the Corrections Corporation of America, their stock dipped, but now it's like, oh, we got President Trump and immigration. Yeah, okay, good times. But that issue is a corporate issue. The issue of housing segregation, the history of housing segregation in this country is basically a corporate issue as well, because banks basically, redlined and just wouldn't sell to people in certain areas, and that practice continues. All of these things are linked. The issue of environmental degradation and the acceleration of climate change is linked to the banks, even though the Pentagon, of all places, has been, not just recently, but for quite some time, listing global warming as a security threat. There's this recognition academically and even operationally to some degree in certain sectors that we need to get out of our silos like in a permanent way. There's just not as much recognition politically, and there's not as there's talk in terms of organizing and activism, and there are some places where we come together on a regular basis, but there are not enough places where we work together.
So finally, you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I kind of wanted to dig in because this seems to be a question, particularly after the election, when, I mean, California showed its progressive colors with everything from statewide initiatives to local initiatives, and a lot of states passed, everything from medical marijuana to campaign finance reform, right to die. So the progressive voice was felt on a statewide level, while on the federal level, it just completely fell apart. And so people are thinking, well, should we then forget like fighting a federal battle here and focus on local, or what do you think is the best way to split energies based on what you've seen with the election, but also in terms of what you've seen with activism?
I think, unfortunately, for everybody's sleep cycle, we have to do both. I think, like, I always say Los Angeles is like a microcosm where, like, we can experiment with stuff, and then if it's successful, people take it elsewhere. I don't think Los Angeles is alone in that. And I think there are really great points that can be made locally, and then scaled up. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're learning around fractivism and anti-fracking comes from Pennsylvania. Comes from the little towns in Pennsylvania that banned fracking or had de facto bans by changing their zoning laws, by, like, doing planning. And that's a model that we are adopting here, or we're trying to adopt here. We're trying to put the strongest restrictions possible on oil wells. Obviously, our pitch is more to make it hard to drill at all, not just fracking, but, like, petroleum as well. But we learned that from smaller counties in Pennsylvania, and then the state of Pennsylvania and the state of New York, and the way that New York banned fracking and the counties in Pennsylvania banned it in their little areas. And I think there's a lot that can be said for that, and there are a lot of lessons that can be learned on the local level, and then extrapolated and policy interpreted. It just run.
I was gonna roll with it because it had that, like, it had that cadence to it.
Yeah, but policy interpreted to work on a larger scale, and I think unfortunately, though, like I said, we need to do both. We need to always be doing both, and I think especially in the larger states, we really need to get involved in state elections too, because there are really large opportunities to change state policy and to use those state policy changes as an example. Like, oh, you said this would never work. Works here. We got, like, 40 million people. So what's up? I think it's a huge opportunity, though.